Hey everyone, good morning. I'm gonna let folks trickle in and then we'll get going. Just give it a minute or two. All right, good morning everyone who's joined. We're gonna give another minute for folks to log in and then we'll get started. All right, let's get going. Good morning everyone. Welcome to today's Local Motion Learning Network event. My name is Jonathan Weber. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Complete Streets Program Manager here at Local Motion. I'm sure most of you know about Local Motion, but if you don't, our mission is to make biking and walking a way of life all across Vermont. I'm super excited about today's webinar. We've got a great group of panelists. We're going to talk about Greenways, which I think is a topic that a lot of folks are super interested in right now. We've got a ton of people registered for this webinar. We've got a lot of folks joined already. First up, just a bit of housekeeping. We're going to have everyone muted through the webinar, but if you have questions or comments throughout, please feel free to type them in the chat. If you have questions specifically for me, you can post them in the questions section. Really use either the questions or the chat if you have comments or questions. And I will field them to the panelists throughout if there's something especially relevant. We've got a somewhat shorter presentation today, and afterwards I'll unmute everyone or give everyone the ability to unmute so we can have more of an open discussion. If you've got any technical issues, you can send them directly to me through the question box or just contact me at jonathan@localmotion.org. We are recording today, and we'll share a recording of the follow-up in the follow-up email that you'll receive a few hours after we wrap up. And you're welcome to forward that email to anyone who you think would be interested. They'll be able to use the recording that's provided in the email. The email is also going to have a really brief survey with 4 questions that are going to help us orient future webinars about Greenways and just Local Motion's work in this space generally. So I really hope you'll take just a couple minutes to respond to the survey. It's very quick. If you're interested in this topic, it's going to be really helpful for Local Motion to keep engaging you all and keep supporting you all. So today we're focused on Greenways, which is a term we're using to refer to paved or sort of graded stone multi-use trails. Think, the Burlington Bike Path, Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. We'll begin with an overview of what constitutes a Greenway, where and how they're usually built, and some of the tools and resources available for creating them. We'll also hear from Vermonters who are closely involved with the development of trails in our state. And our hope, again, is really that this webinar is going to serve as a foundation for a series that'll help you all develop greenways in your communities, overcome some of the challenges that pop up along the way. And so we will have a discussion after the presentations that'll hopefully get at some of those topics that should be covered. And again, please take that survey so we can sort of figure out where to take this next. So our presenters today are Tom Sexton. He's the Northeast Regional Director for the Rails to Trails Conservancy. Yvonne Mwangi, who is the Trail Development and Trail Link Coordinator at the Rails to Trails Conservancy. And we'll also be hearing from Dave Stanley, who is the Chair of the Northwest Vermont Rail Trail Council, Greg Western, who is the Executive Director of the Cross Vermont Trail, and Hans Husse, who is the Council for VAST and the Vermont Trail Alliance. So I'm now going to turn it over to Tom from Rails to Trails, who will kick off our presentation. Take it away, Tom.
Great. Hi, Jonathan. It's exciting to be with everybody.
Thanks, Tom. And can you just turn on your camera, Tom, if you don't mind?
Yes. How's that?
Thank you. Looks good.
Okay, great. Morning, everybody. Good to be with you. Thanks for this opportunity, Jonathan. You can see my first slide if you'd like to reach out to me with any questions afterwards or at any time. Send me a note at tom@railstotrails.org. This is my 30th, almost my 30th year. November 1st will be 30 years with Rails to Trails Conservancy, or what we sometimes say RTC. And I work in the 10-state Northeast area of the United States. So we work in basically 3 areas. And to simplify it, I would say that right now we're doing trail projects, we're doing technical assistance work, but we also do some things that are less known, a lot of policy work to secure funding for trails, especially at the federal level, but also the state level. And as well in that policy work to streamline the development process for trails to happen and protect the current law and hopefully create new policies and law that create more opportunities. And then lastly, we also tell people where the trails are. So that's our Trail Link site, Trail Link. You can go and Google that, or go onto our website, and it has the 40,000 miles of multi-purpose shared use paths trails in the United States. Most of those being rails to trails. Some of you might know this and are rail buffs, but at the peak around 1918, we had over 300,000 miles of railroads in the United States, and that wasn't even counting tens of thousands, probably about 40,000 miles of interurban trolleys. So we had a vast network at one time. About half of that is left, and some of that has turned into rail to trails. I talked about the 40,000 miles. That's 40,000 miles of shared use paths, multiple use trails. A subset of that are rail trails, about 24,000 miles. And you can see that the average length of a rail trail as opposed to other types of multi-use trails, the multi-use trails are a lot shorter, mainly because included in there are a lot more urban greenways, some of them just for walking. So what is a greenway? Let us ask all-knowing Wikipedia, right? We always go there. And it says it's usually a shared use path along a strip of undeveloped land set aside for recreation use or environmental protection. Yeah, that's pretty close. And as Johnson said, we're going to be talking about greenways and multi-use trails and shared use paths sort of interchangeably here. But I would add in there that a transportation corridor can also be a greenway. Most times greenways have trails, but they can also be for wildlife corridor. They can also be used for environmental reasons to have a riparian buffer. And for both of those, perhaps access and use is not encouraged. It could also be a waterway trail. And lastly, we do use on-road facilities as bikeways, of course. Sometimes you could call those a greenway. And if you're on your bike, any corridor is a greenway, right? Because you're doing it the green way. But the on-road bikeways, we have to be careful about that because they're not trails, as we'll explain a little later. So why are we all pumped up about trails and connectivity and creating these spaces? As you can see from this simple diagram, a lot more people are impacted. Not just residents, but businesses and all kinds of spaces. So this very simply but dramatically shows the benefit. Not to say it's a replacement for more traditional neighborhood parks and other spaces, but it's just one more way, and there's also a lot of opportunity, as you'll see, to create more linear parks. So you're probably familiar with a lot of the benefits out there, and they sort of are housed in the recreation, I mentioned transportation, health, economics, habitat, historic preservation. Then there's a lot of other subsets of this as well. Also social. The social benefits are huge, especially in this last year, we saw the benefits of that. And we're probably missing a few on this page that you're thinking about, but there's a lot of them right there. We won't go into that too much today, but I just wanted to make sure we talked about that. Now, I don't know where all of you are on this continuum of trail development. Perhaps you're just at that point where you're thinking you have a trail or corridor in sight, and you're thinking about creating that. So you're right at the organizing point. But soon you'll be looking for funding to fund your operation, as well as starting to write grants to foundations or Department of Transportation, Department of Natural Resources, et cetera, to get funding to do these other phases: the planning, the acquisition, the design, and then ultimately the construction. Most of the rail trails in the United States have been funded through federal government, going back when we started really the sea change in December 1991, that the first time the DOT, the federal highways, set aside money just for trails. There were actually 10 different types of pots of money, and rail trails was one of those. Included others were pedestrian, bicycling, even had back then historic preservation. But I wanted to talk a little more about two of them that don't always get, I think, enough concentration. One is maintenance and the other is operation. Maintenance, we really overlook that quite often. And here's a worksheet, and this is something, if you contact me, if you have an open trail and you'd like to get a better sense of your costs, I'd be happy to work with you on this. Also, if you're thinking about a trail, I can work with you to do that. This is the stuff, this is like kind of doing your personal budgets and your checkbook. It's not always fresh and sexy, but it's really, really needed. And as a growing movement, and a movement that's becoming more sophisticated, we really need to keep up with the times, and vis-a-vis everybody else who wants funding from Congress or from the State House. So here are 4 groupings, basically in terms of the trailhead and the surface. Next, vegetation management, and a big pot of trailside amenities. Many of those would pop up on that on the screen now if this was a live document. And then last, the general maintenance, the litter removal, that type of thing. Volunteers are a huge part of this, as most of you probably know. I've been amassing slowly and difficultly numbers for the price per mile from trails. And probably the volunteers are the easiest to get because a lot of them document their time. It's more difficult to get it from federal and state agencies who say it's part of a bigger budget and we really can't break it down for you. But it's really critical to have this so that, for instance, if we choose to go to the State House or go to Congress and ask for money, we need to know what the costs are. Plus, if somebody was to get sued for an accident or what have you on a trail, you can show that you have done your due diligence. You know, you have a system to maintain your trail, and you know the costs of those trails. So please reach out to me if you'd like that worksheet, and I can be happy to take you through it. It's not as bad as it looks. Then from a management and operations standpoint, getting to know your users and their needs and perceptions is really, really important. If you can't purchase, for example, an infrared counter, you can get a nice one for $500. They're called Trash X. Or you can get one for almost $4,000 from Eco Counters, and you may have seen these, which are more permanent and do a few more things, including giving you real-time data because it has a modem embedded in it. But if you don't have those, that's not a problem because you can do manual counts on select days that give you a pretty good estimate for the number of users. And you can tell a lot from just observation. You can tell the general age of people, their sex, their race, mode split, et cetera, and really get back a lot of information. Volunteers can do that. Interns can do that. It's a great way to also doing the surveys here. And you can even hand out those surveys or do sort of intercept surveys where you're taking people through maybe 10 questions on a clipboard. That's a great way to build up support for your trail as well, even your trail project that isn't even started. So as I said before, if we're going to compete with, for example, the highway industry for money that will bring the United States into a modern balanced transportation system, we need to have good data. And without that, it's really, really hard to compete. So we need to count, because if we don't count, we don't count. A couple more things. We're working hard now, as you are, to connect the separate trails and really create trail systems, the connectivity. Our bill in Congress right now, which we're very hopeful about, will be included in the new infrastructure package that hopefully will come out. We can see that once we connect one trail with another, there's a great increase in usage. And this is really from limited data. As I said, we don't have quite enough counts going on, but I think that will increase, and we need to make that case. In addition to the basics, I wanted to go over a couple things. A lot of the basics, and Yvonne, my colleague, who's in the DC office, is going to talk about that soon. But I wanted to share a couple other bigger trends and opportunities that we see. And a lot of this comes down to sharing. And America, they're not always good about sharing. I'm not sure if they're getting worse at it, but it's really a basic thing. And there's all kinds of rights of way that we can share. Rails to trails, abandoned corridors are just one way. Another way is rails, a subset of rails to trails is rails with trails. And I'll talk a little bit about that. But also utility corridors, the energy, the water, fiber optic. There's a lot out there. Some companies have partnered with trail projects, but most of them sort of have their own right of way, and they don't want to share. But there's so many great reasons to share as well. And our roads, we can make our roads greener. We can create shared spaces. We can also use the gravel roads, and Vermont has a big gravel road program as well that seems to be growing and growing, especially in the North Country. Just looking, for example, at interstate and intrastate gas pipelines, the transmission and distribution lines. I mean, it's a vast network. I mean, why not mitigate a lot of that and make that greener? Vermont doesn't show here, but I believe you get gas from Canada, and there's about 750 miles of transmission and distribution lines up there in mostly, I think, in northern Vermont. But that's just an example of one partner. Now, sharing, there's a number of reasons why to do it. First, it's both environmentally and economically to our benefit in a big way. It's very difficult to create new rights of way now. America is very dense, and there's a lot more stakeholders, and we're growing more and more, and even we're growing in terms of our impact and our sort of closure to certain spaces in America, even when our population growth isn't large in some states or some areas. We still impact it. But also another reason for sharing is because it really makes these spaces safer. And let's go into that a little bit. The safety aspect. Having multiple users in a space is really advantageous. And I remember landscape architecture school a long time ago up at UMass in Western Massachusetts, and my landscape architecture professor talking a big book he felt that was great was Oscar Newman's book on defensible space, and it really talked about this natural surveillance that goes on when you have people in a space, not just linear, but any space. And that was really important to architecture, landscape architecture, and any space. So that's a good read. I held a railroad corridor summit in Philadelphia in 2013. We had class 3, class 2 transit. We had 2 class 1 operators. And at the end of that small but really, I think, telling group, they all agreed that having, and this was the actual quote from one of the class 2 operators that has a rail with trail, that said that having a trail in a railroad corridor helps manage people because it tells them where they need to be, right? A lot of railroads are suspect and don't want people in their corridor. They want to isolate. And isolation is not always, and probably most times, a recipe for safety. If you have that natural surveillance, you have that natural monitoring that goes on a trail, you see something that shouldn't be happening, just about everybody has a phone. They can call 911 instantly if they have cell coverage. So unfortunately, after 9/11, we got into a little bit of a mentality of let's isolate spaces, let's isolate people, let's build more fences, and it really hasn't made us or our infrastructure that much more safe. So let's look at some fun trails. Probably know where this is, in Stowe, Vermont, the Stowe Recreation Trail. Great facility, 5 miles long. I mentioned gravel roads, really great use. I mean, I can't really tell the difference between a trail and this particular gravel road here. So that seems like a natural fit to extend a trail or to link two different portions that can't be linked any other way. It works. Also, our roads. Here's a separated pathway, but they built it at the same time. They integrated the design and the cost savings. We should be doing more of that. Another example, a path built when this road was resurfaced at a large savings in money. As you've seen, and I think Burlington has some of this. There's been about 300 miles since the pandemic of rights of way that were the roads that were flipped. Some temporarily, some may continue as permanent trails and shared use paths. It makes a lot of sense. So there was one of those good things that came out of the pandemic, perhaps. We've learned a lot of other ways and created a lot of other tools to interact between people and with our environment. So here's one good way. I spoke about rails with trails, excuse me, which is a subset of rails to trails. We have about 400 rails with trails where the bike trail, the walking trail, the rail trail is next to the active tracks. This is in Maryland, the part of the Great Allegheny Passage that goes after leaving DC on the C&O Canal in Cumberland. It goes another 150 miles to Pittsburgh. And I didn't take this photo, but I held the gentleman's belt so he could lean out and get a great photo. Sometimes in that photo you just saw there was no fence. There was no barrier between the active track and the trail. In this case, this is the Blackstone Rail Trail in Rhode Island. They have about a 6-foot fence. It's not always needed. Sometimes it's not a good idea actually to put up a fence. Sometimes it can be a grade separation. Sometimes it can be a vegetation as well. Here's one I really like. This is in Philadelphia on the Schuylkill River Trail. And you can see so many types of uses and so many modes and so many partners sharing a corridor. Of course, we have everybody in the middle, walkers, bikers, baby strollers, etc. And then folks who have access to green space off to the side. And then after that, we have recreation and transportation on the right in terms of the waterway. And then on the left, we have a triple track freight line which is very busy, and there's at-grade separations, at-grade crossings with the trail further on down, if I was showing you more pictures. But and then even automobile traffic overhead. So this before this became a trail and a greenway, was kind of an eyesore, and it wasn't a place that people want to go. And 30th Street Station, Philadelphia, which is the main stop for Amtrak, is right off the screen across the river, immediately across the river. So let's talk about another promising partner, and that's electric utilities. About 17% of rail trails existing now share with maybe one other partner or two, or even three. Some you can bundle a lot of other users in a corridor and share those, not just above ground, below ground. Of course, there's various entities that are crossing the trail, but mainly here we're talking about going along the trail. And a lot of other opportunities because so many trails intersect other electrical lines. Here's a good one in New Jersey. So what motivates utilities to embrace trails, for example? And this has to some extent universal application to a lot of other partners, but it gives them access so they can go and maintain that infrastructure. It provides those eyes for monitoring, that natural surveillance that I talked about before, which is so critical. And that goes with all industries that use corridors. Of course, the present mindset is I need my corridor for me and I can't have anybody else. But most of the reasons that are brought up are really not valid when you think about it. It's going to cost them less money to build, it can cost less money to maintain, and putting people in that corridor makes it a lot safer. Also, sometimes they care about goodwill. And it's always easier if the utility owns the corridor in fee. Quite often, they do not outright own it, and it's a lease, and that makes it a lot more problematic. And they're very big on biodiversity and habitat, as you may know, especially the electric utilities, and that's a meeting place, and that's a commonality you would have with them as you create your corridor. But some of the obstacles that you have already probably thought about, the biggest one is the fee simple ownership. That's a big hurdle to come over. Topography, I don't know if that's that huge. If you want to walk uphill, you can. If you don't, you don't have to. But trails can be created just about anywhere and safely. So I want to end there, and thank you very much. I'm going to hand it over to, unless Jonathan wants to entertain any questions, I'm going to hand it over to Yvonne, my colleague, and she can tell you where to find a lot of this great information on our website.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Just before Yvonne starts, we did have one question that was especially relevant to your last slide. I think you got into it a little bit, but do you have suggestions on sort of how to approach utilities to open their corridors to trails?
Well, I would always, first and foremost, and Yvonne can show you on the page, on our web pages, where in our toolbox, where some of these lessons are. But I think it's first appeal to their goodwill, definitely right off the top, and do your homework and show them the impact they can have graphically with pictures. And I think that'll go a long way to getting your foot in the door. And if they're still don't want to play ball, then you can go outside that sphere a little more and let the public know in a positive way that you're thinking about this. And sometimes that indirect leverage can then move that utility or other rights of way owners into cooperating.
Yeah,
and then if it really gets nowhere, right? And some of this can take a long time. Then think about what that utility. This happens with railroads. It happens with energy corridors, et cetera. They're always, as we are with Rails to Trails Conservancy, we're asking Congress for funding. We're asking Congress, we're asking for the people's money. We're doing that at the State House too. They are as well. So you can let your elected officials, your senators, your state senators, in Vermont's case, let them remind them that this railroad, this utility is asking for taxpayer money. And so in doing that, they should be more willing to play ball and do this for the benefit of the community. And I've seen times when that is used, and it really is great leverage.
Thank you, Tom. That's really helpful. That's good advocacy tactics. And thanks for the presentation. I really like that slide with the graphic about the linear versus neighborhood parks. That was really great. Never thought about it that way. So, all right, I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne here. Just a second.
Hi.
Hey, you should now be able to share your screen.
All right, let's do that. I'm just gonna start my presentation over here, and you guys let me know what you are seeing.
You're all set. We're seeing your presentation. Take it away.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So yes, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Locomotion. I'm very excited to be here to let you guys know a little bit about how Rails to Trails works to support communities in creating their own trails. We really want to empower individuals and communities to do this work because this trails movement has grown since RTC was founded. So we're not able to be as involved as we would like in every single project, but what we've done is we've collected a lot of knowledge over the years based on our experience and the experiences of our partners and people that we've heard about, and we've tried to collect that and provide that for free. So that's what I'm going to be discussing today. I'll just be talking about a few of the resources that we have that you can access if you want to learn more about trails and greenways. So this is the outline. I'll try not to take too long, but basically I'll start by talking about our web resources, things that you can find on railstotrails.org. Then I'm going to briefly talk about TrailLink, which we call our Trail Finder site. Tom already mentioned that, but I'll talk a little bit more about it. Then I'll talk about the Trail Expert Network. The Trail Expert Network is our peer-to-peer platform, so trail professionals, advocates can talk to each other. And then finally, finally, I'll be talking about technical assistance. Sorry. So finally, I'll be talking about technical assistance and how we directly interact with people building trails, having challenges, looking for best practices, and so on and so forth. So RTC's web resources can be found on our website, Rails to Trails Conservancy, railstotrails.org/resources. Once you get on the website, the resources are under the resources tab. You click on it, it'll be a drop down. You'll see a bunch of things. I'm not going to cover all of them today. I will only highlight a few that I think will be really useful, especially if we're at the 101 level. They're really good for learning, collecting examples, being inspired, and so on. So the first resource I want to tell you guys about is the Trail Building Toolbox. This is a really impressive set of articles on different aspects of trail building. Again, this is inspired by some of the work that we've been doing, some of the work that our partners and other people have been doing. So we've just collected it and tried to present it to an audience in a free and digestible way. So the Trail Building Toolbox basically talks about the trail building process, breaks it down into headers. So as you click on the corresponding headers, you'll find pages under that topic. So each header talks about a different aspect of the process. So if it's acquisition, if it's the design phase, if it's the planning phase, there's pages underneath that to let you know, to cover a different topic areas under that main header. So you can find that at realtortrails.org/buildtrails. And I'll just open one of the pages for you so you can see. This is typically what a page looks like. It has descriptive information. We try to use really accessible language because we know we're not trying to necessarily talk jargon to necessarily a professional audience. We want this to be accessible to anybody who's interested. So we try to use really accessible language on our pages. We'll also try to integrate other different resources, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, our webinars and some PDFs and other, further reading that you can do. The related resources are basically documents that you can click on to do some further reading, a deeper dive on a topic, and I will be getting to that in just a second. But before I do that, I want to highlight that this equitable and inclusive trails section is in the toolbox. We have a number of pages within the toolbox that talk about equity because, as Tom mentioned, last year was really a year of learning about the value of trails and being outside. And it really exposed how there were inequalities in the access to trails, even though we feel like they're free and they're accessible and they're safe and everybody should have them. We recognize that people don't. So we do have different pages scattered throughout the toolbox that talk about how we can be more equitable and inclusive in the way that we're building our trails. So I just wanted to make sure that that is emphasized. So going back to the related content, the links that you find on the right-hand side of your of the toolbox pages go into what we call our resource library. Our resource library is a collection of mostly PDFs, but also, other kinds of documents. It includes things like plans. It includes things like reports. It includes things like fact sheets or press releases or articles. Anything that we think is useful that explains a concept or concepts really well. So some of these materials are RTC created and published. Some of them are external. Again, it's really just whatever is most useful to the readers, to our audiences. A note on searching the toolbox, on searching the resource library. Every document in the resource library is tagged with a topic. So for example, here we can see rail banking is one of the tags. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of topic areas. So every single document is tagged. So searching by tag is really the best way to do it. You can see I circled the tag drop down on the right-hand side over there. The other thing that you'll see is that every document is part of a collection. So the collections are just an easier way to search under a broad topic header. So if you're looking at trail planning, or if you're more interested in more policy focused documents, if you're thinking about, trail management, like all of these documents that fit under these categories are in these collections. So collections are actually just a very convenient way of grouping some of our resource library documents. And then we have webinars. So some people just love to learn in a more auditory way. Webinars are also interactive if you catch them live. So we have really ramped up our webinar production over the past few years. So we have a lot of webinars that you can find on railstotrails.org. A note about the webinars is that the most recent one is first. So if you're looking for an older webinar, you have to scroll down the pages. We're really proud of the webinars that we have created. And if anything I say in this forum maybe kind of goes over your head, maybe I went a little bit too fast, I can't show you everything, but we do actually have a webinar on some of the trail building and technical assistance resources. And I can make sure that that link is sent out maybe in our post-webinar materials. So just know that that information is always there, and it's always great to hear from people who are actually doing the work on the ground like today. And then a note on our trail blog and magazine. This is really high quality production done by our communication staff. The magazine is quarterly and it is for members, but the trail blog is free. It sits on our website under Experience Trails. There are many, many articles, many success stories and interesting cases, and you'll get a lot of information and inspiration from the trail blog. So I really encourage you, if you're learning about trails, if you're more interested in just learning what other people are doing, check the trail blog often, because there's lots and lots of new content being uploaded there. And then Tom had mentioned traillink.com, 40,000 miles of multi-use trails. This is our mobile app and website. And what you'll find is that each trail has its own page. It has a description, it has a photo, it has related content or related links. So it's also a way for you to just find trails around you that you want to ride. That's really the primary focus or the primary aim of this site. A lot of this information, we rely on you to kind of help us keep it up to date. So there is a way that you can suggest edits to trails or trail information that's provided on the site. You can also provide a review. If you get out there and you love it or you don't love it, just leave a review on the site. You can also submit photos of your visit to these individual trails. Now, it's also a resource for learning, because on the related content side, you'll find contacts usually for a trail manager that is a local friends group, that is, like a county. So if you have questions about how the trail was built, how they navigated a certain process, you can actually reach out to them directly. And speaking of reaching out to people directly, that's the aim of our Trail Expert Network. Our Trail Expert Network is a learning platform that's been provided by Realtor Trails that allows a peer-to-peer exchange of knowledge and experiences and learning between trail professionals, trail advocates. So this is really aimed at people who are involved in the work. You can be a volunteer. You don't have to be like the most seasoned person. But what we try and do is we try and provide you with a newsletter, telling you, some of the news that's pertinent to trails, how certain policies are affecting you and affecting your trails. We also have a Facebook group, the Trail Expert Network Facebook group, where people can post their questions. A lot of times I've also seen people post their events on the Trail Expert Network Facebook group. So if your group is having an event, you can publicize it over there. So the idea is just let people talk to each other. Honestly, that's the best way we can learn. That's kind of what we're doing today. So that's the aim of the Trail Expert Network. One of the services of the Trail Expert Network is called the Early Warning System. So briefly, this is just how Rails to Trails lets you know that there's a corridor, a railroad about to abandon, and it could possibly make a good trail. So we monitor the federal regulator site. The federal regulator is known as the Surface Transportation Board. We monitor their site. And then if an abandonment is coming up, we let people know, we let our 10 list know, we let local electeds in the area know. And then we also help walk you through that process. Some of that material exists in our toolbox. We have a whole acquisition section that talks about rail banking and everything you need to know about how to convert a railroad into a trail. But if there are questions, we're also like willing to help walk you through those things or provide sample documents with boilerplate language and so on. So you can sign up for the Trail Expert Network. There's a link in this PowerPoint, but again, this is something that I can also make sure is included in the sort of post-webinar communications. And finally, I just want to talk about technical assistance. So all of the materials that we've done and mentioned have been inspired by our technical assistance, the ways that people have come to us directly. But not everything will be covered in there. So sometimes we'll just point you to existing resources, and sometimes, you know, maybe it's a longer term follow-up, and we're happy to be a resource to you. So we provide technical assistance by phone. We also provide technical assistance by email. And you can see our emails over here. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. office, so I'm more of a national. I cover sort of national, anything that's not covered by our regions. Assuming that most of the audience here is based in the Northeast, I would point you guys to my colleague, Tom Sexton. And the reason we like to have people reach out to their regional contact person is because they usually have a lot of local knowledge and local contacts. So they're really in the best position to help you. But if there is someone who is in a place that doesn't fall within any of our different regional offices, then that comes to me. I believe that's it for me. So thank you so much for listening.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Yvonne. Those are some really awesome resources. Really appreciate you sharing them. And yeah, let's make sure we include some in the follow-up email that'll go out. Super. So next up, we are going to hear from Dave Stanley about some of the work along the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail. Dave, there you are, and I'm going to go ahead and I'll share my screen. Just a second here. Oh, Dave, you are still muted. Dave, try speaking again.
Will
There you go.
anybody be presenting about the LVRT, which has a junction?
Oops. Sorry, I'm just having some trouble getting the right thing pulled up here. There we go. Okay, go ahead, Dave.
Yes. Will anybody be presenting later about the LVRT?
Yep, yeah, we will have Hans discussing the
Lamoille Valley Rail Trail.
Yep. You still there, Dave? Okay, seems like we're having some audio issues with Dave. So let's go ahead and move to Greg from Cross Vermont Trail. And Dave, we'll try and come back to you after Hans here in just a minute.
Jonathan, will anybody be presenting later about the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail? I could make a few comments. Or Jonathan?
Yeah, we're gonna have Hans talk about that. I'm gonna have you come back to you, Dave.
Okay, hey, I'm Dave Stanley. I'm in Fairfax, which is in London. Sorry, on with this mic is on. Yeah, your name? Good. Okay. Whoa. I think I'm gonna have to come out here by the router. I couldn't talk when I was supposed to. So maybe in 10, 20 minutes, I may have to be out there.
All right, take it away, Greg.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to talk about some on-the-ground experience following up on the Rails to Trails folks who are speaking, very broad. Cross Vermont Trail Association is who I work for, and we work in the Winooski River Valley and the Wells River Valley, central Vermont, quote unquote, or Burlington to Waterbury to Montpelier to Groton State Forest, and then on over to the Upper Valley. That's sort of our zone. So we, unlike the Rails to Trails Conservancy, we do not have 24,000 miles of trail, much shorter, but it's definitely a more of a nitty-gritty experience for us. The idea of the Cross Vermont Trail is definitely inspired, though, similar to the Rails to Trails Conservancy, but just on an extremely local scale, which is that years ago, early 90s, folks who founded the Cross Vermont Trail noticed that they wanted to build more trails in their town, and they wanted the trails to both be fun and recreational and go to pretty places, but also to be functional and to go to desired destinations. So we often shorthand that as we're trying to connect schools, villages or neighborhoods, and parks or conserved wild natural areas. And they wanted that in their town, and then they realized, if you go to every town, and this has been my experience, there's always someone in town who wants trails, whether it's the Conservation Commission or the town forest or the cross-country coach at the high school building trails in the woods behind the school or things like that. So then the idea was, let's connect them together and make a regional or statewide network of all these local trails. And so the Cross Vermont Trail Association was founded to work together with local trail advocates. We work in 17 towns, and to help promote trails that exist now and to help improve trails that exist now to generally accessible guidelines. Our goal, again, is trails that are inviting and usable by people of most abilities for non-motorized use, walking, biking, skiing, stuff like that. And then ultimately to make new sections of trail across town lines to connect together local trail networks into a statewide route, the Cross Vermont Trail. Right now, the state is if you go up, if you were to walk and just follow, with keeping the river on your left, the Winooski River, and then go down the Wells River through Groton State Forest to the New Hampshire border, it's about 90 miles, and there's about 34, 35 miles of trail that are signed Cross Vermont Trail route, which means there's about 55 miles of scenic, quote unquote, scenic on-road routes. One of our interim goals, our ultimate goal, complete statewide trail off-road, so you can travel and get across the state, walking, biking, not on the road. Long-term goal, often say it's like, building a cathedral, a little bit at a time. Talk more about that in a minute, speaking of time. But in the meantime, we want people to get past the bike route and sign. And so if you're on a bike path or a bike route, especially one that's paid for with federal money, there's all these rules about, that these big retro reflective signs that are like, end of path, bike route end. And but if you just maybe there might be a good usable road or a sidewalk, and then you can connect to where a new path begins. So that's our interim function, is to kind of advertise the best possible non-path sections to connect together the existing paths for people who want to make longer trips. And then at the same time, selecting the places where those off-path connections are really not that good for generally accessible, or people who are younger, older, less physically able to walk and bike. And usually it's roads with narrow shoulders and high speeds. So if there's a road with a narrow shoulder and a high speed, especially if it's a road that's maybe not that scenic, we're looking for how do we get off the road. And currently, as an example, our big project is we're building miles of new bike path, universally accessible path in East Montpelier, which is connecting the Central Vermont path, the Barre Montpelier bike path network, up to the U32 school, the regional middle and high school, and then on across East Montpelier to where an old rail bed begins, which carries on in various forms out across the state to the east. And so that's an example where there was an old railroad there, which was an alternative to Route 2 in the railroad days. Went out of business in the 50s, was abandoned. So Yvonne had talked about that, that alert system where they're like, oh, it's being abandoned. Didn't have that in the 50s. So in the late 50s, the railroad went out of business, and a lot of it reverted to private ownership or was repurposed by the state. So in East Montpelier, it was taken by VTrans, Agency of Transportation, and they actually used it to expand Route 2. So folks who are familiar with Route 2 in East Montpelier, it's a big, wide, modern road built in the early 60s, and it's used, and that's the old railroad right-of-way. They buried the old railroad underneath that. So we're working with VTrans now, doing this big project to build a new section of path in the highway right-of-way or on other state land, also some utility company land like Tom was talking about, and school district land, also a farm, and one private residence where folks have given us an easement, to reconstruct a trail that is similar. It's not a rail trail, the rail bed's gone, but it's similar to a rail bed in that it's a relatively wide gravel path, relatively level, inviting, and accessible. It's a long, slow process to rebuild those connections where they've been lost, and so saving those existing corridors is definitely plan A if possible. But because in our bailiwick or our zone, Winooski River, Wells River, that zone, there isn't one simple continuous corridor, unlike, say, the Missisquoi River, which has an old rail bed, which is rail banked. The Lamoille River has an old rail bed, which is rail banked. The job there is really to save the bed and to save it for the future. Whereas for us, Burlington to Montpelier, through Groton State Forest, over to the New Hampshire border in the Upper Valley, there's no one single old or co-aligned right-of-way we can use. So the work of the Cross Vermont Trail Association is to work together with local communities, landowners, people like that, trail users, to see what can we figure out in your place. Like, how can we make it work where you are? In some places there is remnants of an old rail bed. In some places it's class 4 roads. We have worked a little bit with utility companies, although it's not necessarily the power lines, but there's some of their service roads, and things like that. And we're really focused on, so the end of the, that's what is the Cross Vermont Trail, and sort of our goal is to be an on-the-ground resource for the communities that we work with. Often say the Cross Vermont Trail is like a jackknife. We got a lot of tools, but they're all small. But in each community, it's which tools needed. So like in the city of Montpelier, they don't need the Cross Vermont Trail out there with volunteers to build the trail. They built a paved bike path, but they do need us to go out with volunteers to do things like help control invasive plants or poison ivy, which grow into the trail once it's built. So we do that a couple times a year. Other towns like East Montpelier, they needed us to take the lead, to apply for large government grants, and to build what is going to in the end be a $2 million project, and many miles of new trail, large bridge over the Winooski River. This past Saturday, National Trails Day, we were just out in the town of Newbury, in the village of Wells River, over by the New Hampshire border. And again, That's a place where we initially raised a big grant to build an underpass under I-91 to reconnect a severed section of old rail bed. And then now we go do the annual maintenance. So we were out there this weekend doing the annual maintenance on it. And so that's basically the intro to what is the Cross Vermont Trail and how we work. Again, I would say the difference between us and Lamoille Valley and Missisquoi Valley is we're the by any means reasonable organization. And in that way, we're similar to what Tom was saying about the Rails to Trails Conservancy, looking at all the options, trying to figure out what's the way to make the connections on the ground, nitty gritty. I would say that if there are folks, closing thought, if there are folks who are interested in accessible trails or trails that connect in your area, I would say go for it. It's definitely possible to do. It's not usually not easy. You know, it's definitely diligent labor, but it's not hard labor. It's just diligent labor. It's like running a marathon or walking a marathon, maybe sometimes. So, and the Cross Vermont Trail Association is a resource. If you want free advice, that's always available. But especially if you're in our bailiwick, which is the Winooski River watershed or the Wells River watershed, and especially if you're a landowner or involved in community organizations or town government, you know, we can be a very hands-on partner with folks. That's our purpose, is to help connect towns together. And I would direct folks who want to learn more or perhaps see a slideshow or things like that, which I'm not showing you now. You could go to crossvermont.org, crossvermont.org, and you know, that's pictures and more, you know, poetically phrased description of the work we do. The short version is nitty gritty, making new trails, trying to save old corridors where they weren't saved kind of in the first place, but trying to pull the fat from the fire. Hard work, but definitely doable. And we encourage people who are interested that it's possible if you want to. And that is the introduction from me. Looking forward to questions later on. Passing it back to Jonathan.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. Yeah, Dave, let's give it another try here. Dave, I think you may still be muted. No, all right, looks like we still don't have Dave. Let's go to Hans.
Hi.
Hey Hans, would you just introduce yourself and then take it away?
Hi, my name's Hans Husey. I'm an attorney. I represent the Vermont Trail Alliance, and I also represent VAST, which is responsible for maintaining the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. The Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, once fully constructed, will run 95 miles from Swanton, Vermont to St. Johnsbury. Will be the longest rail trail in New England. Currently, approximately 35 miles of it are built. I could go into the history, but I would just echo Greg's point that patience is a necessity when you're looking at a project like this. The Lamoille Valley Rail Trail, the work started there in the early 2000s. The first $6 million came in about 2005, but due to permitting and fundraising and other barriers that were encountered along the way, as of last year, only 35 miles of the 95-mile trail were complete. And then with the application of some, I like to think, some carefully placed publicity pieces in local newspapers and appearances at town meetings and other efforts that were made to raise the trail's profile, the state of Vermont stepped up and put up the funds necessary to complete the trail. The trails are funded 80-20, with 80% coming from the federal government, but you have to come up with the 20% locally, and that's what was really holding the trail up for the last 5 years. The entity responsible for maintaining the trail, the Vermont Association of Snow Travelers, simply couldn't raise the $3 million that it needed to raise. It had raised approximately 10% of what was needed, so we were looking at doing small projects here and there as opposed to doing the entire trail. And we were looking at another 10 years probably to finish the trail. But then we got very fortunate. We got the governor of Vermont on board. He included it in his budget. And now all the permitting is underway for the trail. The design work is underway for the trail. And the $13 million necessary to complete the trail from the federal government looks like it's going to happen. And the projected opening date for the full, fully completed trail is sometime next summer. We think a 95-mile long trail will make it a destination trail. And that means if you have a 10 or 15-mile trail, local people will probably come and ride on the trail. But it's not something that's going to cause a biker to fly into the state and spend several nights in order to use that trail. A multi-day trail that offers overnighting experience and hopefully eventually, luggage shuttle services, bike shuttle services, and support services will attract people to come long distance and use this trail. And because this trail now will intersect with other trails like the Missisquoi River Rail Trail, once people are here, then I think it's more likely that they ride the other trails in the area. And a multi-day trail experience is something that if you've done it and enjoy it, you immediately go looking for similar experiences. And so it promotes further enthusiasm for rail trails everywhere. I think one of the strongest arguments we made in favor of the state funding this trail was to look at economic studies that have been done for the Burlington Bike Path, where they estimated that even that approximately 10, 11 miles of trail up to the bike ferry and back generated approximately $2 million a year in revenue if you looked at all the various uses of the trail. We then looked at an economic study that had been done for the Petit Train du Nord Trail, which is a 110-mile trail that runs from Saint Jerome, Quebec, up through Mont Tremblant and extends 110 miles. That's another trail that people ride over 2, 3, or 4 days, depending on their level of fitness and what they want to do along the way. The study showed that that trail generated up to $16 million Canadian annually from people coming, staying at various inns, using various restaurants, paying for the shuttle service. I think the shuttle service itself that takes your bike and your luggage along the trail is necessary for you, generated $500,000 annually just in that one service. And so we were able to make the case that this was an investment that would quickly pay for itself, especially if the state of Vermont only had to put up the $3 million. Once built, the hope is the state will take the trail over and treat it as what they call a linear park. So you have a 95-mile park that's about 60 feet wide. But I think it makes sense for the state to own and operate this as a park. They own and operate the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail in conjunction with local communities who help in the maintenance, just like we have local communities along the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail called the Friends of the Trail, and they raise funds to contribute towards maintenance and to do things like put up picnic benches and benches along the route. It's good to have that type of partnership along the length of the trail. These trails offer all sorts of benefits in terms of recreation, health, and otherwise. But if you're having a tough time selling the trail, if you can come on in with some of these economic benefit studies, that can get even the most reluctant parties to agree that these projects make sense and should be constructed. And I think we're in order, if Dave's going to have any time to talk and we're going to have any time for questions, I think that's where I should leave it right now.
That was great. Thank you so much, Hans, and especially thanks for that economic impact data. That is super important. And is that data available anywhere for folks to look at? Is there a report or anything?
I think if you Googled the Petit Train du Nord in Vermont in local newspapers, it was published in about 15 or 20. I wrote an article. If you would like, I could email that article to you and you could make it available.
That would be super. Yeah, thank you. All right, let's see if we can get Dave now. I'm gonna try and pull up your presentation here, Dave. Okay, I think we've got it.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
We can hear you
Can
right
you hear
now.
me? Can you hear me, Jonathan?
Yes.
Okay, are you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little garbled.
Okay, good.
but-
I'm Dave Stanley. I'm the council chair of the MVRT. MVRT, Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail, goes across the northern tier from St. Albans to Richford. 1989 is pretty much when the idea happened. There was a bridge derailment in Sheldon by the Canadian Pacific Railroad car that took out the bridge, made it unusable. And then there became some talk about, wow, why could we rail bank that? So we really got in early on rail banking, which is fantastic for us. VTrans pretty much handles our maintenance. They do mow it twice a year. And Carol, can you mute that? Sorry about that. I got an interruption. But the towns along the corridor from St. Albans to Richford are Sheldon, Enosburg, East Berkshire. We have 9 communities, and our council's made up of different community members. We usually have 10 to 15 people at our council meetings. We meet every other month. As Hans said, we're looking for ideas to enhance the trail, like picnic areas, maybe scenic areas where we can put a bench out over the Missisquoi River for a viewing. Our views on the trail pretty much are along the Missisquoi River, also a lot of the farmland, so you're biking through at times 8 feet high corn in the summer, other times beautiful hay fields with songbirds. So it is a scenic trail, and as Hans said, we have people who visit this trail from pretty much all over the United States. It's not uncommon to be out there on a weekend and talk to somebody from New York or Maryland. They just wanted to see what the trail was like. I think I would like to echo what he said. We do have a junction with the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail. We share that in Sheldon, and where that is shared, it's going to give us a 26-mile trail in addition to sharing their 92 cross Vermont. Also off our trail, there are loop trails up around Lake Carmi, one of the beautiful loops from Franklin and around to Highgate, and a trail that some people, really a side trip that a lot of people like to do on a road or a gravel bike, is start in Richford and do a circumnav of Jay Peak, which is about a 35-mile trip with 4,000-foot elevation gain. That's more for the hardcore bikers, but we have people who do those things. Different groups use the trail. We have people who are out there at the break of dawn, walking dogs, getting exercise. We have a health group, community health group, Rise Vermont, which is promotes events to get people out, do geocaching, different things, just to get people exercising and walking. Walking is a great use. As you see here, snowshoeing in the winter, cross-country skiing, and I'd be remiss to say that the Vermont Snow Travelers, VAST, is a huge, huge help. Not only do they groom the 26 miles in the winter, but they are really on board with a lot of know-how on repairs and building kiosks, and we've had several members. We always have a VAST member on our council, and those members give us a lot of hands-on help with things that we like to do. And pretty much to improve it. Enosburg Dairy Days is another community group. They use the trail there for a run, and involving the school children. Some of the things that we've had come up over the years is the first part of the trail was pretty much constructed from about 1994 to 98. That was 9 miles from St. Albans up to Sheldon, and that got to the bridge there that needed to be repaired. That was repaired with a grant, I think, for $700,000 back in the day. And then the next part of the trail from that bridge out to Richford, which would have been another, say, 17 miles, that was pretty much established around 2001. At that point, we wanted to move into Canada. Richford had a 3-part community program to connect that into Canada to the trails that Hans talked about. Unfortunately, 9/11 happened, and we haven't heard hide nor hair of that for 20 years, but just recently there's been some talk. So that'd be great if we could get that done. A couple things I'd like to bring up that maybe just from in my position where we have all these hands-on people would be, how do we involve our community? How do we involve these 50 hikers out at dawn with their dogs who I think they just think that's done by taxpayers. They don't really realize the volunteer effort. Also, if you can get those people involved, then you get political clout when something is an issue or you need to come up with $10,000 or more. Maybe a bridge has to be repaired, and VTrans is looking to take a big chunk, maybe 60,000 out to do a bridge repair, or average culvert is usually around 10 grand. That's a lot of dollars. So, how can we justify that? So I think we need some ideas to further involve the community. We'll be looking at that RT site. I think that has some good ideas. I think one thing that I've always thought we could do is if we had a bicycle-powered tricycle, like you'll see in tourist areas, and we can go to nursing homes, we can go to places where people can't get out and bike, and we can get like John Q. Public's grandmother on a bicycle and get her out for an hour. That would be a lot of great PR. I think how do you hit the news stations? I think something like that is something that people who are watching TV at night, watch their news, they see that and they say, wow, yeah, that MVRT people, they're doing some nice things, getting some different people out using the trail. We had as you can see, this has all been hands-on since 90s, the 2000s, 2010. This year, Greta Brunswick with the Northwest Regional Planning got us a grant through a Northern Borders Community grant program. And we were able to interview different companies. We decided on SE Group. We've been very happy with them. They've done work. I've biked at the Hood River in Portland and in Durango, Colorado, different areas where Allegheny Passage, where they've done their work. And now we have some, professional ideas how to handle marketing, designs of kiosks, things that pretty much we've dealt with here as we could. So I think that is really been a great thing. We've redesigned our logo to better reflect the people and the activities it represents. We are going to try and involve trail-friendly businesses so that they can get more traffic flow to their businesses. And I think one of the nice ideas that SE Group came up with was a window cling where you could put like a little saran wrap type cling onto the window showing, hey, yeah, come on in and spend your money here. You've traveled from Ohio to bicycle in northern Vermont. We really appreciate that. I think that might be about all I want to present right now, and thanks for getting me connected, Jonathan.
yeah, very glad we were able to get you on. Sorry, folks, about the technical difficulties there. So we've got some questions for presenters and panelists. Let's see. I think this one's probably best for Hans. Kyle asked, is there any chance of establishing a rail trail from St. Johnsbury to Gilman? It's a beautiful stretch of abandoned trail. I believe that's on the rail line. Do you know anything about that stretch and any potential for it to be developed?
I know there's been talks about extending the St. Johnsbury Trail in that direction. There are possible loops both into New Hampshire and Maine and into Canada. I am not the person most up to speed on what those options are, but I do know they've been under discussion.
Great. And then sort of a similar question, not necessarily for Hans, maybe Tom could chime in on this. What are the, how do we address the opportunity to create really long distance connected routes? I think obviously the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail and the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail are a huge step in that direction. Maybe what are some other states that are making progress on that in terms of really long trails that connect across the whole state, and what are some tips for, I think, the people who want to achieve that in Vermont?
Well, a couple people mentioned the Great Allegheny Passage, with which that 333 miles from DC to Pittsburgh, 180 of that is canal, and the rest, 150 some, is rail trail. That's one of the good examples. However, and I didn't show this in my presentation. I guess we don't have time now, but New England has an emerging network of 1,100 miles. A couple years ago, I brought together a couple people from each state, and we articulated a system of the main spines, and the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail is one of those. That's the main one in Vermont. That's the connection in Vermont. And then using perhaps from St. Johnsbury south, using the Connecticut River Bikeway. That's an on-road system, which presents challenges. However, once we get down to White River Junction and West Lebanon in New Hampshire, then the rest of it is trail for that 1,100 miles in the 6 states, and we cross over to the northern trail, which is 60 miles of that is completed from the Connecticut River, almost the Connecticut River, about a mile or two gap, all the way to Boscawen, and then we're working on getting that down to the Massachusetts border through Concord and Manchester. So that would be something maybe I can post later. But New England has, and of all the areas of the United States, New England is the most recognizable region. When you say New England, everybody can name those states. When you say the West or the South or the Mid-Atlantic, it's not really known. But New England will have, there's some great ones. So Lamoille, the Mass Central that goes 120 miles through Massachusetts, the Northern Trail, or what's really the expanded trail, 110 miles of the Granite State Trail in New Hampshire, and then there's also the Long Trail in Connecticut from that's a lot of canal from New Haven up to the Massachusetts border, and that's 90 miles almost done. So there'll be some big linkages coming in time, and New England has some great opportunities.
Hopefully the completion of the LVRT and the connection to the Missisquoi Valley Rail Trail, I think will really show again, the value of these linear parks to Vermont and our rural economies. And I think there's a lot of reason to hope that that's going to spur development of more trails across the state and hopefully keep us working towards that sort of interconnected network and into other states. Let's see if we can get one more question in here. I know we're out of time. And folks, if you want to ask questions, feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to actually, if you'd like to speak it. Drew asked, he was commenting that it was a really excellent campaign by Hans and the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail to get people excited about funding, with articles in papers, presentations in local towns, to generate that interest and excitement. And that we don't often think about public relations as part of trail development. So Hans, can you talk a little bit more about how you planned for that sort of PR effort, or how you decided to put resources into that aspect?
Sure. Am I on?
Yeah, you are on.
It wasn't a, we had hired a formal fundraiser, and that hadn't really worked out very well for the association. We actually did almost as well trying to raise funds on our own. But we just got local volunteers along the length of the trail to take our press piece and go to their local town meetings. Vermont has annual town meetings where everyone from the town gets together to discuss town business, and you can get certain things on the ballot. And so we asked them to put on the ballot, does the town of so-and-so support the completion of the Lamoille Valley Rail Trail? And we were able to get 18 to 20 of the towns along the trail to affirmatively state their support. And now you got a little blurb for that everywhere. And then I wrote a piece that I made available to all the local newspapers. So, and that got circulated and published, and so that was helpful also. And that was the extent of our PR push. Other than we did email blasts to state legislatures seeking support for the funding.
That's great. Yeah, I think I remember that op-ed that you wrote, and it's really interesting that you did that outreach around town meeting days. That's really smart. I think maybe something that we should think about going forward for development of these trails, to show that local support.
Hey, Jonathan.
Yeah.
If you could share my screen for a second, I just put that map of New England on just to give some context to Vermont. It's long distance trail linkage.
Yep, you should have the ability to share now.
Great. I know we're running out of time, but I probably should have had a slide of this in the beginning. But
that's right. We've still got some folks on. Feel free to hang out for now.
Yeah, if anybody wanted to ask me anything about that, I'll hang out.
Very cool. Let's see, we have one comment about the replacement of old railroad bridges. My son wonders why old railroad bridges are having to be replaced for rails to trails. He's concerned about the destruction of historical train features. I suppose this goes along with the concern about the loss of rails for return to train transportation. Any comments or perspective on sort of replacing those old bridges and the loss of the rails themselves?
Well, it's happening. There's literally thousands of bridges that have been repurposed for in that 24,000 miles of rail trails, and some of them, might be more along the line of a smaller extended culvert, but there's been some magnificent examples. And that's a great way to preserve the corridor, and especially if it's a wide bridge, if it's or double bridge, or it's triple tracked or something like that. Someday, if it needs to come back into service, that's one of the things that when rail banking happens, we want to make sure those structures are there, so that if a railroad ever decides to relocate there again, or co-locate. Hopefully we can do a shared type situation, make a rail with trail. If we don't have the bridges, it's a problem. Some states have not been progressive about maintaining those right in the beginning, and there was a big orphan bridge and tunnel program, back in the 70s, I think it was. And unfortunately, they took down a lot of this infrastructure, but it's sound stuff, and it's probably not going to carry too much more than a maintenance vehicle or something in the interim, but it still could be used in the future for train use as well. So there's good stuff on our website about that as well.
Yeah, if I can just add that if the railroad was able to complete the abandonment process, it's a process with a number of steps. So if they were able to get to the end of it, they would likely, if the railroad doesn't own the line in fee, it would just go back to adjacent landowners. So it would break up into many, many pieces that would be a lot harder to assemble into a trail. So it's really not a loss, it's very much a preservation. And as he said, also, if they fully abandoned, a lot of times they do take down the structures. So rail banking is actually what stops them from doing that.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Tom and Yvonne, for that. All right, we're quite a bit over, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you so much to our presenters for participating today. I think this was a really great discussion. This was really intended to just be sort of an intro or a beginning discussion about Greenways, and we want to turn this into a little more of a series with more specific focused discussions about aspects of developing greenways and managing greenways. So please do respond to the survey. It's going to be linked in the follow-up email that'll go out today or tomorrow, and that'll help us shape these webinars going forward. So again, thank you so much to all of our presenters, and thank you to everyone who came today. And have a good one.
Thank
Stay
you.
cool out there.
Thank you.
Happy trails.